Hey, beautiful friends, and welcome to another edition of Fun Times Magazine. I am your host, Lavon Nichols, and we are celebrating National Mental Health Awareness Month as well as Military Appreciation Month in the month of May. And so we are so happy to be able to highlight amazing people who speak to these amazing awareness and appreciation days within the month of May. And so today we have Julius Hayes, and he is a retired United States Air Force man and retired City of Philadelphia social worker. And you can make sure, Mr. Julius, you can make sure that I said that correctly. So it's from the United States Air Force. Do we say anything else after that?
Well, United States Air Force Vietnam veteran, and I'm a
Yes.
retired City of Philadelphia Department of Human Services social work supervisor, specifically in child welfare.
Awesome. And thank you so much again for joining us today. I think that you are a perfect person to talk to highlight National Mental Health Awareness Month because you can speak to it from the standpoint of a vet who has experienced war and different things like that, as well as the public school system and the city of Philadelphia working as a social worker and all the different things that take place. Can you tell us a little bit? I have your bio here, but nobody can talk about you like you. So I know that you are from Philadelphia and went to South Philadelphia High, but tell us from South Philadelphia High, how did you end up in the military?
Well, I was at South Philadelphia High School, and one of my close personal friends' cousin came to visit us one day, and he was dressed in his Air Force uniform. And as you know, the Vietnam War was going on, and we were up to be drafted. So I asked him, I said,
Mhm.
well, what's it like in the Air Force? And he said, man, this is great. If you're going to go into this. So I said, well, why?
Mm.
And well, he said, basically, he said, you wear your uniform when you're at work, but when you're off work, you're free to do whatever you want to do. He says, it's like a regular job. I said, oh, you got to be kidding. So I took the test and graduated from high school in January 65. Got my notice to go to 401 North Broad Street in April. Went
Mhm.
there, got the test, et cetera, et cetera. And then in October, I actually got drafted. I
Wow.
was like, what? So I ran to the Air Force recruiter, and he says, oh, no, no. He said, don't worry about it. We got you. We already got you signed up. So I said, well, okay. I said, well, when do I have to go? And he says, well, when do you want to go? I said, can I stay out to my birthday? And he said, oh, yeah, sure. He said, it's like 6 months away. So I did. And March 26th of 1966, away I went to Amarillo
Wow.
Air Force Base, basic training.
Okay, so your friends told you that this was a good idea, it's going to be like a job, and then you got drafted quite quickly
Yes.
and you're now into a military career. So like what was that transition from being a civilian and then being, in the military in a different structures, and then you're faced with, extreme circumstances like life and death. So tell us like a little bit about that.
Well, the basic training for me, I want to say it was easy, but I'd already been on drill teams, so I knew how to march, I knew how to parade. In terms of learning to use a rifle and handguns and stuff like that, we had practiced that, in Philly, in high school, etc. So
Hmm.
that part was not difficult. When I got to
Hmm.
Vietnam, though, that was the really difficult part. Up until then, it was like a job, like they said. But in Vietnam, I wasn't there a week before we were shot at, before we had to go on the line and pick up. Air Force, they don't issue weapons. We had to actually go get them when we were called to do what we had to do.
Hmm.
And, was I afraid? Yes. Scared to death. And the odd thing about it, which most Vietnam vets will tell you, is that we were
Hmm.
only required to be there for a year. That something
Hmm.
special was set up. And the first 6 months, you are 3 months, you're scared to death. The next
Right.
3 months, you kind of get used to it and you're walking around like it's no big deal. The next 3 months, you're walking around no big deal. But then that last 3 months, when you know you're about to come home, then all of a sudden we're putting on the helmets, the flak jackets, walking around, and we're afraid. Um,
Wow.
the interesting thing about it, I had a discussion with someone this week. I said that coming home, going to college, entering my career and stuff like that, most military vets are better prepared than most. As
Mm-hmm.
you know, picketing and sit-ins, etc., were the norm in 1969 through the 70s. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, well, you can't do most scare vets. I said, once you look down the business end of a gun and been shot at, the threat of being fired or losing your job is like, yeah, okay, we'll move
Mm-hmm.
on. So you kind of get the
Mm.
kind of attitude that you're, I don't want to say not afraid, but you're not as challenged as other people with the fear of losing your job or other aspects or being disciplined.
Right, because you've experienced, your life
Life and death.
being taken,
Mhm.
being taken away from you. So it's kind of hard to be like, oh, you're fired. Okay, well, I'm still alive. So
Right.
let's go back a little bit. How did you said it was like a 3 month period. I might not get the time frames correctly, but when you were in and you were there for a few months, how did you mentally prepare for that? That's a very stressful time mentally. You can be.
Well, you have your comrades that you're there with,
Mhm.
and everybody who's new when you first get there. Like I said, we have on flak helmets and flak jackets and the helmets and such
Mhm.
like that. And every time you walking around and you hear an explosion or like if you're in combat, you're afraid, which is
Right.
natural. So, unfortunately, everybody dealt with it in different ways. Uh,
Mm.
people became alcoholics, people
Mm.
became drug addicts, and actually, a lot of people committed suicide uh,
While they
while
were there.
while we were there, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
and that's not unusual, one because you see dead bodies,
Mhm.
you see people that that have been killed, and that's something you have to
Yes.
deal with. And that's where I said it led to the really intensive use of alcohol and drugs
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
marijuana, particularly in Vietnam.
So since
That's
this
how
is
that's how people dealt with it, including me.
right, right. I mean, listen, I am as always honored to have someone like you in my presence and gracing our our TVs and things like that because you share an experience that a lot of us we everybody's not built for this. And it's something that, you know, uh we are grateful for those who would put themselves in the line of fire on behalf of others to protect others. And so I'm very very intrigued by everything that you're sharing. And so knowing that this is such a stressful situation, this is life changing for people, did the military offer anything to you guys when they when people maybe reached out or they saw that somebody wasn't handling it right?
Well, actually, while in the service, I can't say that they did. And if they did, I was totally unaware of it.
Hmm.
We spoke to each other, and as I said, we when we were off duty or had downtime, we indulged to
Right.
kind of take up our mind off of the situation. The good thing was is that we had, how should I put it, good communication in terms of
Mm.
it's not like now where you can just pick up the phone and call your family members, etc. You had to go through what we called the military air radio service, and it was like over and out when they, if you
Hmm.
had a phone call to your
Right.
mom or family or whatever. And then we had letters on a regular basis, and the support from the people at home was vastly
Mm.
uh, different back then. I remember standing at the post office box with about 10, 15 people around me said, did John send you those cookies yet? So I never had them to myself. There'd be a line of
Right.
people waiting for when she would
Right.
send them monthly. And we would enjoy that sort of thing. We
Yeah.
had what they called R&R. We got to go a week out of country to country of your choice, Hawaii, Australia,
Okay.
Philippines, wherever, Japan, which I did not do. I took
Hmm.
mine after I left and visited with my former NCIC in the Philippines. before I
Mm-hmm.
came home. And
Right.
that was like good because I kind of knew that I said, look, men not being around women for a long period of time get uncivilized, they act like men.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
said, you know what? I better calm down before I actually land back in the United States. So I spent
Right.
a week in the Philippines with my former NCIC. And then I spent a week at my former base, Hamilton Air Force Base, with some friends who were still stationed there, some friends in that area that I knew, that I went to high
Mm-hmm.
school with and were there in college, actually.
Right.
So I
Okay.
kind
So
of
there.
de-stressed. Yeah.
Right. So that was how, you dealt with it. You mentioned, family and communication with family, your comrades, and then taking the opportunities when given to kind of see the world and not be so involved in the military aspect of it when you had the chance. You can
Hmm.
I've heard this before. People have been able to see the world, and some people feel like, traveling is their self-care. So it's an outlet, it's a way to kind of get away for a moment. And so let's transition. You have had an amazing military career, but then when you came home, you started another career and you were very successful as a Philadelphia social worker. And can you tell us just briefly the transition from that, from the military into being a social worker?
Well, I came home and as I said, I decided to take my discharge and get out after 4 years because
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to go to college. I was supposed to have been in college when I was in the military, and
Mm-hmm.
circumstances didn't work out that way.
Right.
So I got out December '69. I started Temple University in September of 1970. But
Mm-hmm.
prior to that, I had a variety of jobs leading up to that. I was a
Mm-hmm.
census taker. Met one of my mentors, Reverend Thomas Porter, as my supervisor at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Worked for the Census Bureau. From there, I worked for the United States Postal Service.
Mm-hmm.
My uncle said, "Oh yeah, get a good government job. Take the test. Blah blah blah." Silly me, going to college, I didn't complete the test and been
Mm-hmm.
able to work part time or full time at the post office, and I just went on to college.
Mm-hmm.
My first year in college, I was an adult, and I did not get involved in the fraternity sororities other than going to their parties. But I was active with the Black Student Union,
Right.
doing a variety of things. And I was an undergraduate psychology major, liberal arts, and that's what I got my
Mm-hmm.
initial degree in.
Right.
And a year into that, I met my wife, and 3 years later, we got married. And I worked full time the entire time I was
Mm-hmm.
in college, except for the first
Mm.
year, full
Right.
time, and went full time. Took me
Right.
6 years to graduate doing that, but I did it.
You did it. You did it. And so, I know we you ended up being a social worker, but I am curious to know, coming from the military, having these life experiences that other people don't have, depending on, if you were, in different wars and things like that, how was that transition back to being a civilian? And, was there any mental things that you can speak on, or that that your counterparts may have experienced coming back to the States?
Well, one, I had good family support. I lived with my parents until I moved out in
Hmm.
1971. I hung out with my friends who were either in
Hmm.
college, had not gone in the military, or had returned from the military. So I had that connection and the
Right.
connection of people that I work with the post office. And basically, we continued to do what we were doing in the military, which was, get high.
Right. Right.
And that was our way of coping with everyday
Coping with it.
stress. Around 1973 or so, it dawned on me I wasn't struggling in school, but I was having issues in school, and I said,
Hmm.
you know what, I got to change something. So what I decided was stop getting high,
Right. Well,
and
yeah, that would
that
help.
turned out to be successful. That had a lot to
Right.
do with one, me getting married, and also the understanding that the stuff that I was dealing with. And oddly enough, being so focused, one, on the full time job
Hmm.
and my classwork, I really didn't have a lot of time to be concerned about quote unquote my mental health.
Right.
I did see a lot of people that I met in college that were
Mhm.
fellow vets, etc., that had challenges like
Mhm.
this. Two of my
Right.
friends that I started work with in the Census Bureau, we all went to college together in different
Mhm.
schools and all of that, became specialists in mental health. Uh,
Mm.
because of that, specialists in dealing with veterans. I kind of
Mm.
stepped away from,
Right.
for the most part, from acknowledging that I was a veteran. I kind of
Mm.
barely, if ever, talked about it. I had a
Really?
conversation with someone recently, and I said, "Well, why are you so open and talking about this now?" And I said, "Well, I said I don't know." I said, "For the longest, anybody who wasn't in the military, I rarely, if ever, talked about my experiences.
Mm.
And now that I am a disabled veteran officially, um,
Mhm.
for the past mm, 8, 10 years, whatever, I just kind of just let it go. I didn't pay any attention to it. I didn't pay any attention to me. I worked real hard at the Department
Mhm.
of Human Services, and it wasn't until I retired in 2005 that I
Mhm.
started having issues with my experiences in the military
Mm.
and
Wow.
discovered that I was suffering from post traumatic stress syndrome and actually started going to counseling. But as I
I
said,
thank you.
I was like just very active in all of the work that I was doing in the community
Right.
services, etc., that I didn't have time basically pay attention to me. I was a father raising
Right.
my child and then ultimately my grandchildren. And then when I retired, I'm like, whoa, what is this stuff that's going on with me? So a little bit
Thank
late,
you.
but
You know what? I thank you for sharing that. I'm sure there's some people that can relate to that. I think it sounds like you came from the military and kind of hit the ground running and were busy doing all these things. Like you said, you didn't have really time to think about it. Sometimes it does happen when you slow down, and things start to come back to you. So I really appreciate you being so transparent and sharing this because I believe it will help someone else be honest about maybe what's happening to
mhm,
them now that maybe they just didn't even think, or maybe they're not even connecting that it's something from the past, from a
mhm.
military situation coming back. So, how did counseling, if you did take it, how do you see that in taking care of your mental
Well,
health?
Well, it was very beneficial because being a social worker,
Mm-hmm.
clinical social worker, in fact, so
Mm-hmm.
busy helping everybody else, I didn't focus on me.
Yeah.
And and sometimes, and it's kind of hard to acknowledge that. And I knew this, that the people who resist help the most are the people
Mm.
that in the health professions, psychologists, doctors, lawyers.
That's what they say.
I,
That's what they
and
say.
I was like, well, not me. I'm very introspective. I know myself. I've studied
Right. Right.
psychology and clinical social work, and I said I know all of this. Well,
Right.
I wasn't looking in the mirror.
Mm. Okay, I hope that someone is really taking notes because you just dropped some really amazing nuggets right there. I have heard that. I am not in the mental health. I'm not a licensed mental health professional. I do life coaching and have worked in the public school system and all those other things. So I can relate, but I wasn't in the mental health profession. But I have heard that sometimes doctors are the worst patients.
Yes.
Nurses are some of the worst patients because they're used to being on the other side. And like you said, sometimes it's hard for them to see themselves in that situation and looking in the mirror. But I think that just helps somebody to kind of understand that we're all human. We all go through things. We all suffer from, something that's happened in our lives that we may need help for. And it's okay to ask for help.
hmm Yeah, and it's a hard thing to do. And I always would tell my daughter and other friends, I said, "There's nothing to be embarrassed about
Yeah.
asking for help." And I said, I for one, I said, I was always been a good student. I'm the first one in class. Raised my hand. I wanted to show off what I knew, and I was always curious, and I would ask questions. But when it came to this particular issue, I wasn't very
Mm-hmm.
good. I wasn't very good at it with myself.
Mm. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Like I said, I think that, people in all different types of careers can take something from this conversation. I have a few more questions to ask you. So, you were young and were recruited, going down to the military recruiting office, and so thinking about that experience and thinking about where you are now, what would you say to someone who is trying to get into the military now, and how can they manage their mental health, physical health, and while they're serving?
Well, I think it's a lot better now than when I went in. My nephew did 30 years as an
Mm.
Army medic, and he just got out of the hospital. And I said, "What is wrong with you?" I said, "You're a medic and refusing to take your blood pressure medicine, and
Oh
you're in the
no.
hospital." I said, "That is insane." So he hasn't called me back when I left that message for him. He's okay now. I said, but it's what we're talking about. It's like you're in the health and
Yeah.
profession, and you don't look out for your own health, which is really
Yeah.
kind of backwards. But
Yeah.
in terms of this, I think that the military career, it prepares you for so much. I said,
Mm.
and see, for example, coming out of high school, and you've always lived with your parents, and then you go someplace where they're totally in control. That's a
Mm-hmm.
great thing about the military. The discipline and the code of justice and the rest of that
Yeah.
is excellent. Someone tells you when to get up, when to go to
Mm-hmm.
bed, how to walk, how to
Mm.
dress, what time you eat 3 times a day, and you develop a discipline. It
Yeah.
teaches you basic life skills that, in a lot of cases, I was startled when I was in the military. We went to KP, and they have these huge things that they prepare meals in that you physically, a man can crawl into it to clean it.
Oh,
And
okay.
so they were lining us up to do different duties. And one of the guys said, "Sarge, can I ask a question?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "What do you want?" He says, "I'll be happy to mop this floor for you if you can teach me how to operate this mop." And we all turned and looked. This young gentleman had never used a mop in his life.
Wow.
So when I say teaches you to do everything, teaches you how to use a knife and fork, how to eat properly, teaches you
Mm-hmm.
how to make your bed, how to mop,
Mm.
sweep, teaches you how to correctly dress yourself, right? You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to buy any exotic clothes. Everybody wears the exact same clothes.
Right.
Yeah. And it teaches you self-discipline in order to
Right.
do your job, because not someone's not standing over your shoulder all of the time. And it
Yeah.
also teaches you leadership, because as you get
Mm-hmm.
promoted, you start becoming in charge of other people. So it teaches you discipline, leadership. I think it is great for someone who
Mm.
is not immediately going to college or going to some
Yeah.
sort of trade school or whatever, because you learn trades that are usable when you get out of the military. So like some of my friends became plumbers, carpenters, radio technicians, television operators. I mean, you name it, you can learn it in the military.
Well, you just recruited and show people why the military is still a
Mhm.
very honorable and a very respectable way to see the world, protect, and learn life skills. And so for those people who are like they're in it and maybe they're struggling a little bit, what do you advise they do?
Well, talk to your superior officer, and that could be non-commissioned or the officer and stuff,
Hmm.
and trust in the people around you who have spent some time in the military, and talk to them about their experiences, because that's how I learned what to do, what not to do. I was
Yeah.
always a person who would ask questions. I always wanted to know why. Well, this is silly. Why are we doing X, Y, and Z? Well, you don't need to know right now. When you get to such and such a point, you'll find out. And then as time will go on, I said, "Oh, okay, that's why we're doing what we're doing." For myself and my own was, I'm trying to think of the correct thing. Uh, it's a number that they give you, which is your career field, and
Mm.
and MOS or some such thing. I forget what it means, stands for, even though I know my number right now. Uh, But given my career field, I could have worked in radio,
Yeah.
television, Western Union, telephone, computers, and I learned all of this stuff, while I was there. This whole idea of, and I'll tell you this because it's kind of a joke. They asked me, so what do you want to do when you come back?
Mm-hmm.
Well, at that time, James Bond and spy movies was popular. I said,
Mm-hmm.
I want to be a secret agent.
Oh.
And they said, nah, you can't get the security clearance for that. And I'm like, oh, wow. They said, but you're good at electronics, so you could do that. So I said, okay. Well, ultimately, I got a top secret security clearance, and I was looking at military war secrets and stuff, came across my screen or the computers that we used back then, and I used to laugh about it. So when I watch movies now or I see things now,
Mm.
kind of inside knowledge about what goes on behind the scenes in terms of these military secrets. And that's why I'm puzzled right now about, well, I won't get into that, about some military secrets that someone has in their hands and was going to share them with people that's now on
Uh-oh.
trial. I think
Uh-oh.
you get my drift.
Uh-oh. I know exactly what you're talking about. But you are such a intriguing person, so much information that you've shared with us today. I want to thank you for again being transparent and then being just wanting to talk about this now. We're happy that you're, talking about this, and I'm sure there might be somebody listening who got some tips on how to maintain their mental health, how to just be honest that you need help. And then I think you recruited some people for the military today because you really made it sound very, very rewarding. It's not easy,
It was.
it's a serious thing, but it sounds very rewarding that you got a lot out of it.
It's an integral part of who I am today. There's a lot of other stuff, but my grandson interviewed me and he said, well, what made you who you are? And I said, well, a lot of things. I said, my family, my community, my upbringing in the church, my education, the particular schools that I went to, certain teachers influenced me. And I said, this whole concept of community and family, I said, that's what I grew up in. And I said, it makes me sad that today's children don't have that. I'm meeting with
Yeah.
30 of my high school, South Philadelphia high school graduates next week, multiracial, multi-ethnicities. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing that we do twice a year when we meet for this lunch, 30 or 40 of us out of a class
Mm-hmm.
of 300, is that
Mm.
we liked each other. Yeah, there was racial
Yeah.
stuff going on right then, but we went to school and we liked each other and we feel like we were part of a community.
Well,
It's a big part of who I am.
Well, we thank you for being a part of our community and for sharing. Fun Times Magazine is so very honored to have you, and thank you again. We want to say that we did this interview in recognition of National Mental Health Awareness Month and Military Appreciation Month. And so, thank you so much for your time, Julius.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.